Innocent blood. Back a bit. In 1215, Innocent III called a council at which the Cathars and Waldensians were condemned. This same council officially approved the term transubstantiation to explain what happened during the Mass, insisted that all Christians should take confession and communion at least once a year at Easter, and prohibited the illegitimate sons of the clergy from inheriting their fathers' churches. Jews were banned from appearing anywhere in public during Holy Week, and from having any position that gave them official power over Christians. They also had to wear a yellow star, but that was only, so that Christians didn't marry them by accident. It was more of a food label kind of thing. To be fair, similar requirements were made of Christians and Jews in Muslim countries. Furthermore, for reasons not entirely clear, all clergy were banned from wearing green. Just for good luck, it also called for a fifth crusade against Egypt. Some people never learn. The fifth crusade did take place, but it achieved very little. After wandering aimlessly around Galilee, where they found one of the genuine water pots used at the wedding of Cana, they went to Cairo, where Francis joined them and tried to convert the Sultan of Egypt. Anyway, Innocent died during the council. He had sponsored wars, he had claimed extravagant titles, he had brought heresy hunting right into the heart of the establishment. For a man called Innocent, he had a lot of blood in his hands. Despite the official condemnation, it took decades before the final Cathars were wiped out. Dominic's approach did not succeed. The soldiers in the south of France were not theologically sophisticated. They couldn't tell the difference between who was Orthodox and who wasn't, so they tended to kill everyone just to make sure. The bloody climax came with the capture of the Cathar fortress of Montségur in 1244. The church authorities, borrowing a phrase from Revelation, termed the place a synagogue of Satan. Montségur was captured, and over 200 of the Cathars were burned alive. One might speculate as to where the real satanic powers were residing. 40 years later, England, the country where the mass persecution of heretics had begun, pioneered a new form of expulsion. In 1289, the Parliament of Edward I refused to give any more money to the king unless he expelled all the Jews from the realm. So he did, making England the first of the Western nations to expel all the Jews from its soil. I know what you did last Summa. When Rome collapsed in the 5th century, many things were lost, including toga wearing, Roman central heating technology, some blokes' house keys, a fair bit of loose change, and Aristotle. Not literally, obviously. The original Aristotle died in 322 BC, but a lot of his writing went AWOL. It was not lost completely, though, because a lot of his fans were pagan philosophers who left to live outside the Christian Empire. So, when trade started picking up with Islamic lands, it brought not only sugar and silk and spices, but also copies of Aristotle. The result was that in the first half of the 12th century, 800 years after his death, Aristotle had some new books out. That's not right, is it? 800 years after 322. It's not 500 BC, we're in 1200, so I think he's thinking 322 AD. Anyway, a long time ago, a long time since his death, Aristotle had some new books out. Works on science, logic and metaphysics that had been preserved by Muslim scholars, then rediscovered and newly translated. Metaphysics is the science of being and knowing, but I'm sure you are and knew that. Aristotle also wrote on theatre. As an 18-year-old theatre student, I was astonished at his notion that stories had a beginning, a middle and an end. Groundbreaking stuff. The other great philosopher of the ancient world, Plato, believed that there was a higher reality. He pictured this world as a reflection of the eternal, a shadow dancing on the wall of a cave. Discovering the true reality, therefore, is largely a matter of divine revelation, of seeing through the wall to the eternal realities. Aristotle, on the other hand, thought that reality was, real. The wall of the cave was solid, and reality could be encountered only by examination, taste, touch, feel, etc. Aristotle believed in a prime cause, some kind of god who got the universe started, but you could not have a personal relationship with this force. And while the universe was, he felt, eternal, souls were mortal. The Church, stunned by these radical new 1400-year-old ideas, immediately banned his books, as did Paris University. But one man realized that you could not solve such ideas by banning them. You have to examine them, study them, get in fact all Aristotelian on them. His name was Thomas Aquinas, about 1225 to 74, and he was a Dominican. He chose a life of austere poverty, much to the irritation of his family, who wanted him to be a rich, powerful abbot. They even tried to kidnap him and convert him to proper monasticism by locking him in a room with a prostitute. Thomas whiled away this imprisonment by writing an essay on logic. Eventually his family, and presumably the prostitute, gave up. His Dominican masters rather underestimated Thomas. They nicknamed him the Dumb Ox. But he went on to study and teach in Italy, Paris and Cologne, and he became the greatest Western theologian since Augustine. Thomas loved Aristotle, and he loved Christian theology, and his aim was to bring the two together. Faith is always paramount, but reason helps you see faith more clearly. It was possible to be an Aristotelian Christian. Aquinas suggested that there were two aspects to reality, nature and grace. Natural knowledge was the kind of stuff we humans can work out for ourselves, not only through our five senses, but also through our scientific, rational minds. Grace knowledge was supernatural knowledge, that is, stuff we know only because God has revealed it to the proper authorities. So this included doctrine and dogma, ideas like the Incarnation, the Trinity, transubstantiation, and so on. He summed all this up in his Summa, to be precise, his Summa Theologiae, which means the sum of all theology. Sadly, total theology was a bit of a misnomer, since it was incomplete. He never finished it. But the bits he did finish became officially the book of Roman Catholic doctrine. Perhaps one of his most influential doctrines has been the theory of the just war. War? Thomas asked. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Well, hold on. Let me just clarify that. Actually, Aquinas argued that there were three conditions under which Christians could wage war. One, sovereign authority, that is, it's ordered by the state or the Pope. Two, a just cause. And three, an intention to bring about good rather than evil. He went on to qualify these ideas, pointing out that the aim of war is ultimately peace, that Christians should have a love towards their enemies, and that violence should be as limited as possible and tempered with mercy and forgiveness. These three principles still serve as the basis for the Church's acceptance of war. But Thomas was a monk, not a politician, and ever since his criteria, which were supposed to regulate and restrict violence, have frequently been used as a checklist to justify some very unjust wars. Ordered by the government? Tick. Just cause? Tick. Will it end up in truth, democracy and better shopping? Tick. Right, let's get bombing. In the end, though, Thomas hit the wall of the cave. All those hundreds of thousands of words, all that stuff about reason and logic in the end proved inadequate. On St. Nicholas's Day, 1273, Aquinas went to attend Mass. In the church, in the chapel, he had a vision, a mystical experience. Well, the truth is no one really knows what happened. All he said was, "I can write no more. After what I have seen, everything I ever wrote seems like straw." He never wrote another word of the book. He died on the way to the Council of Lyons in 1274 in a donkey-related accident. He struck his head on the branch of a fallen tree on the Appian Way. The donkey, following precedent, refused to talk without a lawyer present. Another joke. Aquinas' thought became known as Thomism. Not long after his death, he was accused of heresy by his very own bishop. The universities of Oxford and Paris banned his teaching, but eventually people came round, and 50 years after his death, he was declared a saint. Swings and roundabouts, this theology stuff. Oh, and he also accidentally invented the limerick. A poem in his breviary runs, "Sit vitiorum meorum evacuation, concupiscente et libidinus exterminatio, caritaris et patiantae, humilitas et obediantae, omniumque virtutum argumentatio." Hilarious, I'm sure you'll agree. Let's do a quick fact file on Aquinas. Name Thomas of Aquino, a.k.a. Thomas Aquinas, the Dumb Ox, Angelic Doctor or Doctor Universalis. Nationality Italian, Neapolitan to be precise. Dates 1225 to 74. Appearance heavily built, hence the Dumb Ox jibe. Apparently his complexion was like the colour of new wheat. Isn't that green? He had a big head, it's hardly surprising given the size of his brain. Before he was famous, came from an aristocratic family, a Dominican monk. Famous for theology, and lots of theology. Why does he matter? He's the most influential medieval theologian, famous for trying to reconcile natural reason and speculative theology. His writings are still core teaching for Catholic clergy. Could you have a drink with him down the pub? Sure, if you could only drag him out of the library for long enough. Where are we now? I'll do a bit more. This is a long day. I've only done 4 pages. Couple more. We'll be alright. We'll survive. Yes, we can. While it was boom time for Christianity in the West, in the East things were in turmoil. Russia was overrun by the Mongols in 1237, although in a dress rehearsal for the communist years, the church found a way to survive under its pagan overlords. The Mongols also invaded Poland, Austria, and Hungary. The Pope sent a Franciscan monk to convert the Great Khan, the Mongol leader. When he arrived at the Mongol court, the Khan staged a debate between representatives of the various religions, including the Catholics, Nestorians, Muslims, and Zoroastrians. 2 Jehovah's Witnesses arrived on a door-knocking mission slightly too late. In the end, he decided he was quite happy with animism, thank you. Nevertheless, Christianity did make some small inroads. By the end of the 13th century, there was a church in China, and a Franciscan missionary as the Archbishop of Beijing. Constantinople was now in terminal decline. The Crusaders held it until 1261, but then the Byzantines retook the city. By now, though, the city had been ruined by years of looting and misrule. Desperate, the Eastern Emperor wrote to the Pope in 1274, offering to submit to Rome, if the Pope would use his influence to send troops to fight off the growing Turkish threat. Eastern representatives came to a church council in Lyon, ready to sign up to anything. Papal supremacy? No problem. Western version of the creed, including the Filioque line? Okay. The Pope made them sing it there and then 3 times just to make sure. They would do all the cooking and the cleaning and the babysitting. They would sign up to the lot. Reunify the church, just send the troops. And so the deal was done. But when the representatives returned to Constantinople, and news spread of what had been agreed, there was outrage. The residents of Constantinople had not forgotten the Fourth Crusade. Rome was not a friend, but a bitter enemy. So they rejected the creed entirely. When the Pope heard about this, he condemned them in turn. Christendom was as divided as it had ever been. Sur le Pope d'Avignon. The papal election of 1294 was a long time coming. There had been a vacancy in the papal throne for 2 years because the cardinals could not agree on a suitable candidate. Eventually, they were sent a threatening letter by a famous 85-year-old Franciscan hermit called Peter Morone, who said that there would be divine vengeance if they did not choose somebody. So, they did. They chose him. He was, a bit of a Moroni, actually. His Latin was so bad that he couldn't understand a word the cardinal said to him. Despite choosing Celestine as his papal name, the poor man was so unhappy with his elevated position that he had a small wooden shed built in one of the palatial rooms of his residence, and lived in there. It was the only place he felt at home. In the end, he gave up, and was the first pope in history to resign voluntarily. He was until 2013 the last pope to do so. Significantly, perhaps, Benedict XVI was a fan of Celestine. He visited Celestine's remains after the 2009 L'Aquila earthquake and left his woolly scarf as a gift. On the 800th anniversary of Celestine's birth, Benedict XVI proclaimed the year to be the Celestine year. Maybe he was hinting at something. Not that he was allowed to return to his old life. You can't have ex-popes knocking about. No, his successor, Boniface VIII, thought it best to keep Peter somewhere safe, like, a jail. He spent the rest of his life locked away, and died under suspicious circumstances. The official cause of death was given as infection caused by an abscess, but forensic tests on his skull, done in 1988, showed that it had a hole in it made by a nail driven through by an unknown assassin. Reports that Boniface VIII was seen buying a hammer at B&Q earlier in the day are mere rumour. Boniface VIII was a greedy, corrupt individual. The poet Dante was so impressed by Boniface that he assigned him a place buried headfirst in the 8th circle of hell among the Simonists. and Boniface wasn't even dead when Dante was writing. In 1302 he wrote a document called Unum Sanctum, which claimed that by necessity for salvation, all human beings, including the most powerful of course, are entirely subject to the Roman Pontiff. In other words, if you don't obey the Pope, you cannot be saved. Unfortunately, the King of France disagreed. When King Philip of France put a bishop on trial for treason, Boniface threatened him with excommunication. Philip was so scared he arrested the Pope and passed the papacy to a Frenchman, unsurprisingly, called Clement V, who in 1309 decided that the papacy would be much better off in France. So he moved to Avignon in the south of France, which, while not technically at that time in the French kingdom, still had a lot of Frenchiness to it. You could get baguettes, the shops closed for 3 hours in the middle of the day, and King Philip could still exercise a lot of control. The move to Avignon merely confirmed what many people thought of the church. This was nothing to do with making history, but everything to do with worldliness, politics, power, luxury, and greed.